Well, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, we are super excited about, we kind of got 3 sessions happening this afternoon, but it's all about mobility. So we're going to be talking about transport and, of course, autonomous driving. Now, our first speaker for the next session is Frank Chen. He's the partner of Andreessen Horowitz, which is a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. And they really specialize in backing kind of bold entrepreneurs, those guys that are kind of breaking all the boundaries in future technology. Over the last however many years it's been going, they've raised $7.1 billion across 7 different funds. So these guys are pretty big. They know what they're doing. Also, Frank likes a good fun fact. So this session, I feel, is going to be quite inspiring and is going to get you thinking outside of the box quite a lot. It is all about self-driving cars, from regulation to retail. But when I say outside of the box, we were talking a little bit earlier, and one thing he said to me was like, well, you know what the biggest problem is going to be? Because, of course, autonomous driving is going to be so safe, so we're not going to have any car accidents, which is obviously great. A little bit morbid, but have a think about this. Car accidents are actually the biggest supply of organs when it comes to organ donations, which isn't really an ideal thing, but it's just something that we have to think about. So it gives me great pleasure to now introduce Frank Chen to talk about the future of self-driving cars.
Thanks, Nicki. All right, almost done with day 2. Hopefully this will wake you back up, and we're going to see some fun facts about self-driving cars, and I'm going to launch right into it. So in 1980, the iconic phone company AT&T asked McKinsey to ask how many cell phone users would there be 20 years later. McKinsey sharpened its pencils, ran the numbers, and said there will be 900,000 mobile subscribers in the year 2000. The actual number was 109 million. And these days, 900,000 people turn on their smartphones for the first time every 3 days. And I tell this story because sometimes tech gets adopted a lot faster than we expect, and I think we're at the cusp of another one of these big tech adoption waves, and this time it's around self-driving electric cars that drive themselves in fleets. So let's dive right into it. First, let's talk about electric cars. So it turns out at the turn of the century in the 1900s, 1/3 of all cars manufactured were electric. This is the 1914 Detroit Electric Model 47, a great example of that car. And this was the Tesla of its day. All the cool kids drove this car. John D. Rockefeller, maybe Eisenhower, and very amusingly, Clara Ford, the wife of Henry Ford, inventor of the Model T, drove this car. She didn't want a Model T. It had to be hand-cranked to be started. It needed a team of mechanics to keep it fit. So she drove an electric car. And yet, if you fast forward today, this is US car sales sorted by electric and non-electric, and you can barely see the electric cars. It's a rounding error. So what happened between Clara Ford's day and our day? The short answer is economics happened. You could buy 4 Model Ts for the price of one of those Detroit Edison cars. And that's exactly what's happening with electric cars today. They are more expensive. But the most expensive part of an electric car is its battery. And as Sheems shared yesterday, the price of lithium-ion batteries is coming down very fast. And electric cars have very few moving parts compared to the gas-burning alternatives, as much as 2 orders of magnitude. As a result, electric cars are expected to last much longer than gas-burning cars. So think 500,000 to 1 million miles instead of 250,000 miles. So you put these things together, they're getting much cheaper. They will be more reliable. And so you have a lot of manufacturers building tons of models, with more coming online all of the time. So this is just a snapshot of the cars available today, various form factors, various ranges. Volkswagen just placed a $25 billion order for batteries. So this is getting serious for the manufacturers. So those are the carrots. Those are what will incent us to drive electric cars. And then here come the sticks. These are government regulations that basically will forbid the sale of gas-burning cars, being led by European countries. The Netherlands is out in front with a ban by 2025. And we've got other European countries leading the charge. The UK says 2040 is the last year of gas-burning sales. And the other countries are going to follow suit. So you've got the carrots, lots of great cars. You've got the sticks that's saying it's outright illegal to burn gas if you're moving a car. So that's on the electric side. It's coming. What about the self-driving side? On the self-driving side, if you're doing innovation in the car, you always start in the boot. That's what they call it here, right? We call it the trunk, right? So there's the cell phone in 1946, and then the self-driving computer in 2016. It always starts in the boot. Today, you can buy cars that more or less drive themselves on the freeway. They'll stop if anybody gets in your way. They'll keep safe distance between you and the car in front of you. They'll keep on the lanes so that you don't have to steer. And these are $2,000 or $3,000 options on $20,000 cars. This is not a high-end car. Now, if you're thinking about the cars with no driving wheels, no steering wheels at all, there's trials going on around the world in every city to trial these cars, with more cities up and running every day. And so it set off this amazing race between Silicon Valley startups, European startups, Chinese startups, and of course the incumbents aren't going to take this lying down. So collectively, several $1 billion of R&D investment between venture dollars and corporate R&D spend is going into self-driving. And it's unclear how the dust is going to settle. All the startups, of course, want to be the Microsoft of the space, which is they can charge $200 or $300 for every car that's out there. Open source might win, so it's too early to call the winners here, but there are billions of dollars of R&D coming into this space. So you stick the two of those together. We've got electric cars coming down in price, gas cars becoming illegal, and then self-driving cars, if you put them together, they're dying to be operated by fleets rather than driven by us, right? So think, you've got a car that goes 1 million miles, and you and I, when we drive our cars, we might use it an hour a day. The average commute is under half an hour, so if you multiply that by 2, you've got a car, your second most expensive asset, being used 1 out of 24 hours. It belongs in the hands of the fleet operators that can get 23, 24 hours of use out of those cars. If you run the numbers, today it's about twice as expensive in most cities to take Lyft or Uber everywhere compared to driving your own car. So your own car comes out about 50 cents a mile to own and operate, and to Lyft and Uber everywhere is about $1, so about twice as expensive. By 2030, analysts expect those numbers to flip. In other words, it would be more expensive to drive your own car than to be chauffeured everywhere. And so this is when the economic argument comes back full circle. It's going to be cheaper to be driven everywhere than for you to drive yourself, and that's what causes mass adoption. So you might think, hey, look, I'm not ready to give up my car yet. I like my car. I bought my car because I love the brand of my car, and I love the feel. I love the new car smell. But like with most things, I think these revolutions will come with the young people first. So this is a survey broken out by age of how many people are ride-sharing today. And if you look at the under 34 cohort, it's already a monthly habit becoming a weekly habit, right? So the young people really want to be driven around because they're already taking Ubers. And think about the other end of the spectrum for a second. So my mom just got her license renewed, and this is really the last time she should get her license renewed. I love my mom, but her reflexes are starting to slow, and she's dangerous on the road and increasingly dangerous. And so this is going to be a time where the young people will want it. I want to be driven everywhere. And the old people will really benefit from it, the ones that shouldn't be driving themselves on the road, but they get the full mobility experience even though they can't drive anymore. So it's fantastic. The young people want it. The old people will need it. So I want to spend the rest of the time asking the question, how does the world change if this comes to pass? If I'm right that we're going to go from gas-burning cars we own and operate to being driven around electric cars, how does the world change? So first, let's think about the shape of our cities. First, we need to figure out how to raise the money to build roads and maintain infrastructure. Today, we use a combination of general taxes and usage taxes to pay for that. Usage taxes are things like the gas tax, or driver's license fees, or parking fines. So if you think about each one of them, they're going to zero. There will be no gas tax because we're all electric powered. There will be no driver's license fees because we're not issued driver's license. There will be no parking fines because cars don't park. They're always going to be in motion. They're either coming to get you, or you're in them, or they're carrying your stuff, right? Because that's fleet economics. They need to be utilized. And so they're not going to park anywhere, so there's no parking tickets. So the logical place to put taxes is as a line item in your ride-sharing fees. That's the logical place, but I suspect that many politicians will lose their re-election campaigns on the road to get here, but this is where it belongs. All right, so now we have the money. How do we spend it? So the exciting thing about cities is there's really only been 4 chapters of city design in the history of cities, and we're about to design the 5th. The 4 chapters in the past have been, we walked around in our cities, we brought the horses into the cities, then the cars came, and then the highways came to connect the cities. Those have been the only 4 chapters, and every one of those chapters has seen dramatic changes in the design of our cities. Where do the streets go? Where do the buildings go? What's the infrastructure for? And we're about to design the 5th. And so if you're looking for a tip on a super interesting career for the next 3 decades, I'm going to suggest urban planning, because we're going to rethink our cities for the first time in a generation. Let me give you a sense of how exciting it will be to be an urban planner. This is a very typical street in America. There's 4 lanes, 2 going one way, 2 going the other way. It's basically all for cars. Our friends at Lyft have run the numbers to figure out how much space will I need to actually get all the people in the city from point A to point B. And what they realize is they can take 4 of the lanes and smash it down to 1 lane and get exactly the same number of people from point A to point B. And so you can completely reimagine what this space looks like. If there's 1 lane for cars, we can take 1 lane and maybe put the self-driving buses in them. We can take another lane and put the bikes and our favorite scooters in that lane. And then maybe we get another lane just for people walking around. So you get a dramatic reimagination of the space utilization inside a city. This device is called the Zipper. It is a truck that drives up and down the Golden Gate Bridge, and it reconfigures which lanes are northbound and which lanes are southbound depending on time of day, right? Because you want to reflect the traffic patterns. Imagine that we had a software wand that we could wave where we could reprogram our streets this way. That's where we're going, which is when we're fleet operated, the city manager can basically flip a switch with software and say, this lane, which used to be northbound, is now southbound. And all the cars will know what to do. Today, we need hardware to do that. Literally, this big truck called the Zipper. Tomorrow, we'll be able to do that in software. What else can we do with our cities? Let me show you parking lot density in Los Angeles. We're going to take a little time tour. The darker the brown, the more parking lots. This is LA in the 50s, in the 70s, and in the 90s. Altogether, Los Angeles is 14% parking lot. So if I could walk into the city manager's office at LA and say 14% of your land is coming back to you, can you imagine a higher and better use for that? How happy would you be? That's the world we're heading to with self-driving cars. And if that weren't exciting enough, Elon Musk is digging tunnels underneath the cities. And there's a set of startups working on flying cars. So there will be corridors where we not only take the self-driving cars, we take the self-flying cars. And so urban planning goes 3-dimensional. Super exciting time to be a city planner. All right, let's talk next about how the automotive value chain changes. I think the high-level change is that the auto value chain will look a lot like the airplane value chain. Today, you're loyal to your carrier, Air France or British Airways. And you don't really care what type of plane, unless you're a plane nerd. I know there are people out there that are plane nerds. I'm only going to fly Boeing. But most of us don't care. Most of us choose by convenience and price and who's got our miles. I think autos will look like that. I think the number of auto manufacturers ultimately shrinks. The type of automobile you take is an implementation detail, right? Just like the type of Boeing aircraft or Airbus aircraft you take, that's basically decided by the carrier. And your primary consumer affiliation is with the carrier. So the incumbents in this space would be Uber and Lyft and Didi and Grab, depending on where you live. And I think they will own most of the share of wallet. And then the number of manufacturers competing to sell to the fleet operators is going to shrink. So I think that's where we end up on the supply chain. The type of cars we manufacture are going to be very different. We'll have single player. I like to call them single player cars, right? They only carry you because they don't need a driver, right? So a pod will show up, you get in, it takes you where you want to go. We'll have buses that are sized for 4, 8, 16, 32 people, exactly the right number of people for a given time of day. We'll have vehicles dedicated to carrying your stuff because those vehicles will look and behave differently. We take out the steering wheel, we put in the robotic arm that makes it easy to get stuff in and out of the car. And then we're going to have trains that look like buses or buses that look like trains, right? So the reliability of a train with the freedom of a bus because they're all self-driving, right? So the types of vehicles we manufacture will change over time. If you look at the traditional passenger vehicle, we're going to take out all of the user interface components. So that's the steering wheel, the rear view mirror, the side driving mirrors, the brake pedal, the gas pedal. And we're going to put in essentially enlarged smartphone components, right? Bigger screens, touch screens everywhere. So when you're riding your car, it's basically a glorified Netflix viewing experience. And the carriers will compete on how convenient that experience is. So do you remember what movie I was watching the last time? Because when I get into the next car, I want you to pick up where you left off. Regardless of the shape, we expect a lot more software and hardware into these cars. In fact, if you break down a 2017 Chevy Volt, which is an electric car available in the United States, it's 50% electronics. Half the price of manufacturing that car is going to an electronics manufacturer. In fact, LG didn't report auto revenues until 2014, which is essentially 5 years ago. And out of nowhere, they came and they took half the price of a Bolt. Now, the biggest part of this is the battery. And as I told you, the battery prices are shrinking. And so this is a bit of an anomaly. But the broader point stands, which is a lot more hardware and software is going to get into these cars because the software experience is going to define your loyalty, not the hardware experience. Here's an example of a software company that we hope becomes a valuable part of the value chain, because this is one of our portfolio companies, called DeepMap. And they build very high-resolution 3D maps of the environment that are detailed enough for the self-driving algorithms to consume. So today, you and I use Google Maps. In Google Maps, it doesn't tell you where the curbs are. Why not? Because you know where the curbs are. You're driving. You can see the curbs. But if you're a self-driving algorithm, it'd be great to have the map tell you exactly where the curbs are. They don't move that often, right? So we can just map it once. Then the car doesn't need to figure it out as it goes along, right? So we take some of the computational burden off the self-driving algorithms. And so this is why you need the detailed 3D maps. So we hope companies like this become a super part of the value chain for cars. All right, let's talk about energy. This is the graph of petroleum demand since 1980, and as with most things petroleum, it is a straight up and to the right chart. There's been more petroleum demanded basically every year. There's been two small dips. You see that in the early 80s and then during the Great Recession a few years ago, but it's up and to the right, broadly speaking. And so if you're an oil executive, you might be excused thinking like it's just going to keep on going up and to the right. But some analysts are beginning to forecast that the shape of the curve starts bending as soon as 2020. Which is between efficiency and electric cars, we're going to bend the consumption curve for petroleum, and we'll start consuming less petroleum as soon as 2025 and never look back. That will be decreasing the shape of this curve, which has not been true since the beginning of pumping oil from the ground. The oil companies have taken notice. They're starting to place investments and do outright acquisitions of electric charging networks. Here's an example from Shell. And it's not only the oil companies. We've got the auto manufacturers basically chasing Tesla into building their own high-speed charging networks. This one is Ford, BMW, Daimler, VW, and Audi launching a branded service called Ionity together to build high charging network here in Europe. If you want to know how much more electricity we'll need, it kind of depends on where you live. The short answer is in America, we're going to need the most new electricity. If we take all the gas-burning cars off the road, it's about 40%. In China, you're almost already there because there's been overbuild of infrastructure in China. They're only going to need 15% more electricity. If we want to do it with renewable resources, we're going to need government intervention on this. We're not going to get there under our own power. So if we want the gas-burning cars to be replaced by clean, renewable sources, we're going to need government help. Then the question is, where do the chargers go? In the day that you and I were going to own our cars, the chargers were going to be in our garage at night. But if fleets are operating them, that's not the right answer. So the fleets need to figure out where to put their charging stations, and they're actively at work now. Imagine in a city where all the car dealerships are or where all the oil change spots are. Those could be the new charging spots. Regardless of where we put the chargers, I'll tell you one thing we all know we don't want, which is different shaped plugs at the end of that charger. You all know this from your phones and laptops, but of course this is where we're headed unless we are smarter about this. There's 4 different standards. Great. On the batteries, today we use lithium-ion batteries, which are exactly the same batteries that you use in your cell phones. It turns out the most scarce metal required to make these batteries is not lithium, it's cobalt. which is bad news because most of the world's known cobalt is in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is politically unstable, and Amnesty International thinks there may be as many as 40,000 children working to mine cobalt. So we need to get off cobalt as soon as possible. There are a set of teams working on new battery chemistries, and so we hope my front runner, and I'm hopeful he'll pull the rabbit out of a hat, is the guy who invented lithium ion in the first place, a UT Austin professor named John Goodenough. He's just published a paper where he thinks with glass and silicon, two very common metals, he has new battery chemistry. So I'm hoping that works. All right, finance. Giant pools of money are going to change hands in this transition. Auto insurance will become cheaper because there will be fewer accidents, and it will shift from being a B2C business where you and I buy insurance to being a B2B insurance where they sell directly to the carriers. Other giant pools of money are going to change hands. We're going to stop taking auto loans personally. We're going to stop selling used cars, an enormous market. Here's a fun fact. 10% of US advertising today is to convince you to buy a car or the insurance that goes with it. That goes to zero, right? Because it's going to be fleet operated. And then some fun stories from the justice system. The good news is we won't have DUI convictions, driving under the influence, but that won't be for lack of trying. Look at this guy. This guy is surfing his self-driving car in China. China was not amused. This guy went to jail. Here's another fun thing to think about. There will be no car chases because self-driving algorithms will not race their cars. As a result, movie makers will need to think of a new meme to put in movies to create suspension and drama in their movies. Here's another fun thing to think about with respect to the justice system, which is cars have awesome sensors on them. We can reconstruct scenes in public places with amazing fidelity, much better than a human witness. And so I expect crime in public places where we have lots of cars going by to drop because we're going to have very reliable witnesses. All right, before the pitchforks come out, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, look, driving is freedom. Driving is awesome. Driving is a skill. It's just awesome to drive. And we imagine that we have this experience where we've got our hands in the air and our friends in the back and we're driving down in a convertible. But I have never once had this experience. But I'll tell you, I've had this experience all the time. I'm in gridlock. I'm late to the soccer game. And so if there's a world in which we can go safer and greener and we take the aggravation out of the car and it becomes a third less expensive, I'm all for this world. So when will this world come? The most aggressive estimate is it comes in sort of the 10-year time frame. This is RethinkX is saying that in 10 years' time, we are mostly self-driving. Auto executives say maybe 20 years. Let me conclude by showing you two pictures where I make the case that it may happen a lot faster than we think. This is the Easter Day parade in New York City in 1900, and it's all horses except, if you look very carefully, there's a car. Here's the exact same parade in 1913. And if you look very carefully, it's all cars, except for there's a horse. OK, so in 13 years in New York City, we went from all horses to all cars. In 13 years at the turn of the century, when technology was not being adopted nearly as quickly as we are doing it today. So I'm optimistic that we get to this world very quickly, and I can't wait to be driven everywhere. Thank you very much.